afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the May 13th, 2021 teleconference meeting of the Oklahoma City Law Enforcement Policy Task Force. I do have a few announcements to make regarding the meeting. First of all, I ask that all participants stay muted until they are recognized to speak. Task Force members will be allowed to ask questions or comments at any time during the meeting. Number two, please use the Zoom hand raise feature to speak. The system automatically cues the speakers in the order their hands were raised. Keep in mind, with the large number of people that we have on this call, we cannot always see you on screen if you physically raise your hand. Number three, if the video conference is disconnected at any time during the meeting shall be stopped and reconvened once the audio and video connection is restored. If communications are unable to be restored within 15 minutes, items remaining will be placed on the next scheduled meeting agenda. That concludes that set of announcements, but I do have some introductions to make to the task force. If you will remember, several members of the task force made recommendations that we add representation from the mental health community and the autism community. Today we have with us Janine Bella, who serves as the Chief Executive Officer for A Chance to Change and has been serving in that role since April of 2015. A Chance to Change is a behavioral health nonprofit organization that provides outpatient counseling and education to people of all ages throughout the state of Oklahoma. The organization offers overarching services in mental health and specializes in trauma, co-occurring disorders, substance use, and addiction treatment. Janine, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for agreeing to participate on the task force. In addition to Janine, we have with us, and I don't see her yet, but I'll go ahead and announce her name just in case I don't see her signed in. Emily Scott is the Executive Director of the Autism Foundation of Oklahoma, whose work is focused on initiatives that improve the quality of life for Oklahomans with autism and their families. Her policy work began 15 years ago when her youngest son was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. She is currently leading efforts at the Autism Foundation to provide autism training for law enforcement officers and justice system professionals. Emily, thank you for agreeing to join us and serving as the representative from the autism community. There she is. Let's see you. Okay. That concludes my introductions, and so we'll go to our first item on the agenda, and that is Project Subcommittee status updates from Ganesha Martin.
Good afternoon, everyone. A pleasure to be with you as always. Today is the day that we were going to break into sweat and tears to get some work done. So I hope, John is, I thought you were holding a jersey or something showing you were ready to get going. But so I hope some more of our task force members join us because we're getting down to the nitty gritty today. So I'm going to give you just a brief update and pause. If there's any questions, you can always interrupt me if necessary. So hooray, hooray, thank you. Our subcommittees were attended very well in this past couple of weeks. So we went to anemic to a good number. And so because of that, we had a lot of good interaction and exchange. And so that is going to bring us to a place where we can actually talk about some of those, that exchange and recommendations today. Additionally, I wanted to let you know that we have been in touch with someone regarding the survey, a company called Evolve. We've had several meetings with them. And so we will be moving forward with that. Additionally, many of you know Tango, and I have been in contact with them, and Evolve has, stated that they would be very happy to work with Tango. As you all know, they have very deep connections into our Latinx communities. So that is moving forward. I don't normally, announce all of the listening sessions and all those sorts of things, but because this one is going to be on social media, probably in the next week or two, I will be joining Pastor Scobie on his Facebook Live. We were supposed to do it tonight, but he, as many of you probably know, has a big giveaway tonight for furniture and other things that the community needs. So I just wanted to make you guys aware of that, since it would be on social media. I think that's it. Do you all have any questions regarding the subcommittees or any of the other things that I talked about? I will make my normal ask. I won't call it a plea, but you could call it that if you wanted to. For any listening sessions, I have been having some. Thank you for those who have sent me information. We have 3 actually coming up with the Oklahoma Indian Clinic, starting towards the end of this week and going into this weekend, because they have such deep roots into their community. But so you can reach out to me if you want to have some listening sessions. We do have new members on the task force. I will take a moment just to let you know what those listening sessions are. So essentially what we've been doing is having virtual Zoom listening sessions up to about 15 people, where we ask for those who feel comfortable to talk about their experiences with the police department, both positive and negative. And then we ask them to provide us with ideas on ways that they would like to see the police department improve. And so we just think that that's critical. Part of 21CP and why we were brought in is we are a group of police experts. So we have the ability to bring in best practices from around the country. But none of that matters, in our opinion, if you do not actually have them informed by the community. And so you can reach out to me. My name is Ganesha Martin. And if you have any listening sessions that you want to have, then we can do that. We have been aware that not everyone has access to technology. So some of the things that have happened is some folks have had food and, invited people into their conference room, or folks that they give services to, and people have gathered around in that way. So we will make accommodations so that we can try to hear from folks. We'll send this out as a reminder. But we have also set up an email address. We are still getting emails in from that. And there has also been a phone number that has been set up for people to call and just leave a voicemail. And I am very happy to share that I did get a report that we have had some people call and into that number. So we took all that down. The last thing that I would say is a landing page has been crafted and is up on the city website. When we send around our note, we will, make sure to put that on there, since that we don't have a chat function, since this is, live and we don't have that functionality. But it's basic information. It's nothing on there that you guys don't know, but it may be something that you want to share with community members when they say, what is a task force? What is it about? What is it supposed to do? It has that basic information on the website. So any questions? Okay, perfect. So we are going to proceed into the next phase of the agenda. 2 things. I am going to really ask for people to make sure to stay around for the transparency recommendation that Brian is going to present later on in the agenda. I think it's critical that we hear from you all on this matter. And so I just want to make sure that you all know that is coming, and I hope you'll stay around for that. If you have to leave early, please reach out to us, let us know, because we want to make sure that you hear that presentation and understand anything in it, or everything in it rather. So the next piece of our agenda is crafting themes and trends for ultimate recommendations. And I'll just explain a little bit of the process behind this. So as you all know, for the past, I think 3 months or so that we have been here, we've had the listening sessions, as you know. We've had the town hall. We had the Voices of OKC email. We have also, I've had individual meetings with some of the task force members, both as groups or individuals. We also had someone from our team go back and look at all of the task force meetings prior to us being involved in this project to make sure that anything that you guys talked about was captured. We also took the notes from the subcommittee meetings and also, the notes from the subcommittee meetings and anything that was talked about in this task force since we've been here. And from that, what we're starting to generate are themes. These are not the absolute recommendations. These are things that we've heard from a variety of stakeholders in this work in the past 3 months. And so what we want to do, you guys were itching to actually get something concrete done. So were we. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to spend about the next hour or so where we are going to present on the screen some of the themes and the recommendation, the themes that are going to come up as we build towards the recommendations for you guys to give input. We have the tendency to have some folks on the task force to speak up all the time. I happen to be that person, and I try to make myself give other people the opportunity to speak because I have an opinion about everything. So obviously, I want you guys to be able to, you're here for the task force to give your opinion, but I might be that teacher that nobody likes and start looking around the room today to ask people who I haven't heard speak to speak. Just because, again, like I mentioned, we're talking to the community. And you guys are members of the community, and we need to hear from you. So we also recognize that 1 hour is a very short amount of time, particularly if you haven't been in the subcommittee meetings. So we will be sending this information out after the fact, and you can always reach out to me via email, ask for a separate one-on-one meeting to have conversations. It is very important that we that you hear, understand, and are able to give feedback into this process. So any questions before I ask Jessica to put up, the first theme? I'm just clicking through to see if I see any hands raised or anything. Okay, I do not. So Jessica, if you could put up the first slide. Thank you. So just to reiterate on this first slide, the following are themes and ideas for possible solutions generated from all the work in this area. Brian, can you go back? Oh, there it is. These are not formal recommendations, but rather a reflection of the ideas, the subcommittees, and all of our engagement. And these are not meant to be the final list. Next slide. So the first one is the Accountability Subcommittee, the Citizen Advisory Board. You all know that that's come up in the subcommittee. We had, the presentation from a variety of people during our last task force meeting. So here are a couple of the themes that have emerged. The Accountability Subcommittee focused on redesigning the Citizens Advisory Board to increase its efficacy and practice rather than starting from scratch. However, many of the ideas for redesign are foundational. The first one, reconsider Citizen Advisory Board membership design. Second, redesign CAB with pillars of access, agency, and accountability. Reconsider CAB's scope of authority. So that's greater access to OKCPD records. Consider direct investigative authority with possible subpoena power. Formalize the weight and response to CAB recommendations. Consider policy development review role and change name to be more inclusive, to include something like Community or Civilian Advisory Board. So I don't know if I'll be able to see hands with the slide being shared, but I think the slide should stay up so that people can refer to it. So the first thing that I would ask.
I can see them for you, Ganesha, and we'll let you know, but at the moment, no one's hand is raised.
Perfect, thank you. So the first thing that I would ask if there's any subcommittee members that are on the call who want to give any greater context to some of the discussions that you guys had on this particular issue. And Jessica, if you don't see any hands, then the next thing that I will ask is, for any reactions. Your reactions can be, I don't like this, I love this. What does this mean? What is the CAB? Any variety of responses work here.
Ganesha, this is Chief Nelson. I just had a question about the first one. When they say membership design, are they referring to how members are selected?
Yeah, I was going to ask Brian about that. Brian, can you speak to, oh, I'm sorry, this was raised.
There's some concern that the membership of the CAB isn't inclusive of full community, from returning citizens to a diverse representation to varying neighborhoods. There is a want to make sure that a thoughtfulness about how and who are participating is considered. I shouldn't dig into it further because it was that group's conversation. So if anyone wanted to add to that thought, but it even goes into, and I don't know if we have it on this slide, it might be on another slide, but you can't, only homeowners can be on the CAB. You can't be a renter and be on the CAB. So even that is something to consider as a change to make sure that the membership is inclusive. Also length of service, etc.
Thank you for that, Jessica. Any other questions?
Dr. Thompson's hand is raised.
Thank you. Dr. Thompson?
I just wanted to perhaps, and it may just be me, but it would be nice that, and I don't know where this is demonstrated or shown, but the actual definition or the purpose of the CAB. I don't know if that's somewhere or has been discussed. And I know it's been discussed in previous meetings, but is it discussed in the community what the purpose of the CAB is? And how is that marketed or promoted within the community? I think that's an important point going forward. If there's going to be changes, what does it look like now and what do we want it to look like?
I think we might want to pin that one because I think you might see some more recommendations in that space in a moment, Dr. Thompson.
Thank you.
Anyone else, any questions or comments? So I would also like to, and this may be.
Sorry, Ganesha, Craig Freeman's hand was raised.
Oh, perfect. Yes, sir.
Sorry, I was using Garland's hand raise motion. I forgot to push my button. I was borrowing that from Garland.
There you go. It worked.
I did want to clarify that we were able to clarify that the Citizen Advisory Board doesn't require home ownership, and I don't even believe it requires property ownership. I think there's language in there that could lead you to believe that. I mean, it looked that way and sounded that way to me too when I heard that. But I think it's like it's an investment in the community because I think we have some that don't live in Oklahoma City but work in Oklahoma City. But I still think it's something that clarifying what those qualifications are, what those requirements are, and what the makeup will be is still a valid. I mean, it's a necessary task or goal.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarification. And I'm going to try this one of two ways. I am going to either ask you, for those who are not making any comments, to tell me why Or for you to perhaps, if we can do some sort of informal voting, not that this is not being captured, but if people can raise their hand to say, you know what, this sounds good to me. This seems like you guys are on the right track with this, keep going. Put your hands up so that we can get some sort of read out of this room about what you guys are thinking.
Ganesha, can you hear me?
I can.
Joshua Higginbotham had his hand up.
Oh, perfect. Okay. John.
So the only comment I wanted to make, one other thing that came up in the subcommittee meeting about this was one of the things you're not allowed to be on the CAB if you have a felony. So if you've already gone through the process and everything, you're still not allowed. And that was one change. I know at least most of the community members certainly on there wanted to see going forward.
John,
to anybody.
Can I ask you, was there any conversation around the type of felony? Or was it just the fact that it was a felony in general?
Just that it was a felony in general.
Okay, perfect. Anybody else have any thoughts about that? Specific type of felonies or, whether that's something that you all think is a good idea?
Ed Koninsky has his hand up.
Ed works empty. Thanks. Two comments, or one comment about what you just asked about, Ganesha. I think there does need to be a distinction with regards to felonies that result in loss of life or the use of weapons and things of that nature. I think there should be some level of distinction, but I think some of the lower level felonies should not have an impact on the ability of somebody to serve on the committee. So that's my only comment about that. So I think it needs to be a reflection upon what the levels are and what type of crime was committed. The other one was just looking at the considering direct investigative authority and with possible subpoena power. I would suggest that if we move in that direction, we probably need to make sure that we have assigned to this group, or at least available, a nonpartisan lawyer that can guide or direct people. In other words, somebody who's not representing the city or representing others, but somebody who can be generic, as the word's not coming to me, to provide
non-biased.
Yeah, thank you. That works. Yeah, non-biased approach to guiding the CAB if they choose to do that, and make sure that we're not violating any types of civil rights or laws or other things that we would be doing.
Perfect. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Do y'all see any other hands up?
Yes, MT, I wonder if you could help me. Our team is doing 3 things. Could you announce the hands raised? I believe the next one was Dexter.
I'd be more than happy to. Yes, Dexter is next.
Yeah, I think I might need to change the color of my hand so you can see it better. But my only comment was going to be that I'm sure that the concern was with the felon participation on the cab is the access to the sensitive information that they would be allowed to see. That was my only concern.
Okay, and if I can dive into that just a little bit more. So would that perhaps have you kind of separate maybe someone who had been convicted for fraud or deceit or something like that? Or do you think that's just a concern for all felons, no matter what the crime was?
Yeah, I think you're going to have to look at them individually, but it's just always been a past practice that you try to limit the access of information to someone that had a felony conviction, just like you would, access to a weapon type of thing. But I guess it could be looked at on an individual basis.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's what folks were wanting to do. Okay, thank you for that. MT, you see any other? And I recognize too that I asked people to raise their hand if they just felt like this was all good. So, but if there's other hands that are raised that want to speak.
Yes, after Dexter Nelson, I see Grace Franklin.
Yeah, I just wanted to say on the felony conviction, one of the issues that was brought up is, people who've had a felony when you're 20, you've done what you need to do, and you've gotten in no other issues, and you're now 50, and you want to apply for the Citizen Advisory Board. You may now be a business owner or just a regular citizen living life. That should not be a penalty. And I think it was a very strong point for many of us on there, that you can't be held back from participating on very important things when it comes to the police and the community just because you've had something happen when you were like 25 and you're like 42, and nothing else has happened. So I think it is a discussion about felony level, but we've definitely got to consider that we are leaving out an entire part of the community that has had contact with the justice system, and their voices are extraordinarily important because they have certain insight that for those who haven't may not have. So I just wanted to say that part. Oh, and one more thing. One of the other discussions about membership was there's a thing in there that you can own a business, but you don't have to live in the city limits. I think that's a discussable thing, because for me, you would have to explain to me why you're owning a business supersedes somebody who's a citizen who actually has residency in the city and you don't. So that needs to be a discussion about membership as well. Is owning a business in the area but not living in the area enough for you to be here? Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Very good points. And just so you all know, Jessica is in the background taking notes. Obviously, we have this recorded, but she's also taking notes on the things that you all are saying so we can circle back around to those. So I am going to, for the sake of time, unless there's any other hands that are raised.
Got 3 hands raised. Ganesha.
Oh, perfect. Okay, go ahead.
Sarah Adams Cornell.
Hi, everybody. Just wanted to second what Grace said, but also change it up just a little to say I think all felons should be considered, no matter what the charges are, because they have been most, as she mentioned, impacted by this system. And I think that is some of the most valuable information we can get as people who have experienced it firsthand. That'd be more valuable than somebody who has no, experience in with that system. And so I would urge you to consider everyone, not limit them by conviction.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Sarah.
Next hand up is Craig Freeman.
Thanks, MT. A couple of things. I wanted to comment too on Ed's comment about having an attorney that is involved with this to give us advice, to make sure that we're managing this in a way, and it's not representing the city, or it's someone who's neutral. I would also like to have attorneys representing the city that you would consult with, only from the standpoint of legality, as far as like what you can do with Oklahoma state law, just making sure things that are allowed are not allowed. Or it also can reflect on our own charter, our ordinances, the FOP contract. There's a lot of other things. And I agree with what Ed was saying, that having someone else weigh in on a lot of these issues is important, but also having someone that's weighing in from the municipal counselor's office, I think, is helpful to us, because they're going to be the primary advisors to the council. So I don't think he was suggesting we would exclude them, but I agree with what he was saying about having someone neutral. I think that's good advice. And I think you may have attorneys. I think Brian may even be an attorney, isn't he? Or does he not count?
on
21 CP.
Oh yeah, he is.
Yeah,
and so he is, and so am I. And I had to work in the city, and often a lot of the things I tried to do, the lawyers told me.
So we have built-in legal advisors there.
Yeah.
The only other thing I wanted to mention while we're getting legal advice, was that one of our attorneys was calling me and suggesting that we not use a hand raise feature to vote at this point because we aren't limited by the Open Meetings Act, but we're trying to follow it as closely as we can. And because we didn't put this on as something we would vote, even though the intent isn't we're voting something up or down, we're just trying to get direction, that maybe we do it in the form of trying to get consensus as opposed to taking a specific vote by raising hands.
Sure. Okay. Okay.
That was just a management issue for us.
No, that makes sense. So even if we're asking, do you like this or not, kind of thumbs up, thumbs down? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah,
that
I think
okay?
it was like, let's not go to the place of voting, of just saying,
Oh,
if
yeah.
someone has a problem with it, speak up. And we just take the comments and the feedback and use that as kind of consensus to move forward. Because this doesn't mean we're all agreeing with everything that's on here, because I would say some of the things that are on here, I have some issues with, but I think we should look at them. You know, I think we should investigate them and look at them to go forward. So I think it's more at this point of we're getting consensus to move forward.
Yep. No problem. That was me trying to really
I
just
was
get
with you. I was with you 100%.
get some engagement on this stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Ganesha, Brian has his hand up. So Brian,
Oh, no, he doesn't get to speak.
he doesn't?
I'm just go ahead, Brian.
So I just wanted to weigh in on just a couple things here. One is if we go down the road of having some form of investigative authority or whatever design that we have for what's probably should be called the Community Advisory Board or Civilian Advisory Board, there are many different ways to think about the membership design. You can look at it at a district or ward basis. You can go through city council and have appointments. You can have executive appointments. There's a whole different way, whole different possibilities on how to make it as representative and inclusive as possible that we can think through moving forward. On the very narrow issue of the felony, again, I'm not an attorney representing OKC and I can't give legal advice, but I will say that in encountering what's called CJIS restrictions, the Criminal Justice Information System restrictions on who can have access to law enforcement sensitive information. In other jurisdictions, it's been noted that although it requires a criminal background check, it doesn't specifically tell you what to do with the information you receive back. So other jurisdictions have made the choice to say, it's not a bar to having someone with a felony record have access to that information. That's something that the lawyers for OKC and we'll have to weigh in on and as we move forward. And also we'll need to know what Oklahoma law itself says on that topic. But from a federal perspective, it's been surmounted before.
Thank you for that, Brian. I appreciate it. If there are any other hands up, or we're gonna move to the next slide.
Ganesha, I saw earlier Councilman Stone, and I see John George, and I see Ed as well.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that.
Hands raised before that though. Ed's hand's been raised for a while and John George.
Oh, okay.
There you go. I'll take that as an invitation from Charita. I just wanted to just make one more comment on the felony thing. I think whichever direction we decide to go, I think there needs to be some guidance, and I'm thinking of someone who may have multiple violent felony convictions, or may have a conviction for killing a police officer. I think there should be some guidance and not just a blanket, it doesn't matter. I think there still needs to be some evaluation. That's just what I wanted to comment about.
And the one I'm taking from this conversation, and certainly it's going to be reflected in Jessica's notes, is that this topic is something we need to circle back around to the task force to have a deeper conversation about.
Right,
So,
and that's what I'm getting at. I think we just need to really explore it further.
yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
John George?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I know the FOP probably hasn't said much about the process because we're here to listen and try to figure out the concerns on what's going on and moving forward. I just want to make sure that I'm clear that any vote we may take is just to explore this further. And I don't want this committee to, I guess, be blindsided later if we are against some of these proposals. I don't have a problem with us exploring things further and looking at things, but if we do vote to move forward with some stuff, it doesn't mean we're accepting this, because a lot of this stuff is going to be contractual stuff that's going to have to be negotiated with the FOP. And again, I'm not opposed for us to keep exploring things. I just want to make sure everybody understands if either one of us on the FOP vote to move things forward, we're just voting for the idea of still exploring things, not necessarily we're saying we're agreeing with these ideas.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if we could just go back, somebody, to the first slide. I think when things are written, we hold ourselves to a little bit more. So on this slide right here, we say these are not formal recommendations, but rather a reflection of ideas, the subcommittee, and all of our engagement. These are not meant to be the final list. And these are ideas to generate possible solutions. So absolutely, John, and I shouldn't have used the word vote. I just had too much silence on the call and nobody was talking. And so I was just trying to, get folks talking, and I got them to talking about the vote. So no, absolutely. What we're doing right here is we're just kind of pressure testing this for people to say, yeah, I like this. No, I don't like this. And this is just going to be another mechanism for feedback. And what we definitely need to take away from here is that the felon issue is an important issue that we need to circle back around to. But you will always be clear. And quite frankly, the way this process has been set up, I think the final decisions rest with maybe the city council and the city manager. So this is all input that needs to come from us to be considered, which is why it's so important for people to speak up. So that voices and perspectives can be heard, but nothing final. So thank you for that.
Ganesha, I still have hand raised, and the next in line is Sarah Adams Cornell.
Okay.
Sorry for speaking up again, but this is a perfect time after that comment to say, then what are we doing? If we're not going to be in a space where we're all, that was the whole point of, us talking about FOP being here, is so that we could come to decisions that would ultimately be things that would be recommendations, that we wouldn't get stonewalled at the last minute for months and months and months of work. If there's one thing that I really can't stand, it's having my time wasted. And I think a lot of people feel that way too. And I just want to know that the FOP is going to be hearing, considering, and working together to try to see some change. Otherwise, what are we doing? I just felt like that was saying, hey, make all the recommendations you want, but we may not agree to these things. And that's, to me, like counterproductive to what we're doing.
So I think John, you're maybe still on here. Maybe you want to speak to that. What I think I heard was, and I don't know what your position is, John, in the FOP, but I think what he was trying to say, at least the way I took it, is that he doesn't have authority to vote for anything. If he voted here, that doesn't mean that he's able to have the authority to make this happen. I could be misunderstanding that, but that's the way I took it.
If I can speak up, this is John.
Okay.
I'm the president of the FOP.
Oh, okay.
And you're partially correct there. That's part of it. I do not have the authority on this own. If it's a contractual issue, our membership has to vote on that. But I just wanted to be clear, is there is things I probably will disagree with at this point, but I'm one of those guys, the devils are in the details, and we don't have the details yet. So it's hard for me to form a complete opinion when I don't know exactly what we're talking about besides broad ideas. So if I was voting to move things forward, it's to hear more ideas and to drill it down to see if it's something we could be agreed to. Right now, we're talking some pretty broad-based stuff, and I'm not against exploring things. I just didn't want this committee, because it isn't fair to them for us to sit here quietly or us to vote to move forward. And then later us say, well, we're against that. There is things we're going to be against, I can already tell you, that's going to have to be negotiated in contract. And I really, to be fair to the committee, that's what I was trying to say, is just because we haven't said anything or just because we moved to go forward doesn't mean we're in total agreement. I just want to hear more details.
Okay. And I kind of think that's how a lot of people feel. And that's why I'm really trying to solicit as much feedback as possible. So it's not one of those things where we move off of this meeting and then somebody, talks about what they don't like or, those sorts of things. This is for us to kind of get everything on the table right now. So we can move towards some things that we might be able to have some agreement on. So.
Yes. Ganesha,
Yes, sir.
James Cooper has his hand up.
Okay.
Thank you. So I just have two things. One's a follow-up, and I don't know how comfortable Mr. George is to speaking to some of this, but it might be helpful to hear what some of the, and we don't have to have I'm not asking for a debate right now, especially I just finished finals week last week, so I don't really have it in me. It was fun last week. But it would be nice to maybe hear what are some maybe early areas of concern that Mr. George, speaking from his own perspective, might have right now, so that, again, not looking for a debate, I'm really not, but just to kind of hear what some of these areas are, so that as we move forward, we can already, us as committee members, start thinking, okay, well, if this is the position right now, and here's a goal, how can we meet, how can we find stasis, right? That common ground. So that's my first kind of question. And I understand if someone might be uncomfortable speaking to it, but it will be helpful. And then the second thing is, I know their hand went down, but I just don't get to hear from him as much, but I saw Councilman Stone had his hand up earlier, and I'd love to hear what was on his mind as well. So those are my two. Thank you.
Thanks, James. I did have my hand up for a second, but it was just, I was going to raise a point that someone raised and covered before me, so I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. And thank you, Councilman Cooper. Ganesha, I see no more hands up on this issue currently.
Okay.
Hey, really quick, sorry to not raise my hand first. I think that the question that James asked was to Mr. George about if there were some early concerns. I had that same question. James just put it forward. If we know what those are and we can start working on those as we move forward, and as opposed to working on them later, that would be excellent for us to be able to research and make sure that we're able to adequately address those. I don't know if he's interested in doing that, sharing any of those concerns, but anybody who has any concerns with any of the proposal options right now, I think it would be, in my opinion, and I don't want to take over the meeting, but it would be good to know what those concerns are in advance. So if we can tweak them to make them something we can agree with, great. Or if they're just going to be hard-nosed that we're not going to be able to get anywhere on, then it's good to know that, so we don't spin our wheels.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that. I can't see Mr. John. Is there anything that on this first slide that you see that you see poses some issues that you want to flag for us?
Yeah, the whole scope of authority of the board. Look, can we just start? That would be it. As far as direct investigation authority, possible subpoena power, policy development, review role, formalize the way of response to see. I mean, there's a whole myriad of issues could be there without knowing details. And I'm not going to talk about that in detail, considering some of this may be contractual and we have to negotiate this in contract. But yes, as far as the scope of the authority of the board, I can see the FOP having an issue with that.
Okay. And that's normal. I mean, this is what particularly because it deals with personnel issues and stuff like that. So what I think we should probably do, and I'll talk to the subcommittee heads, but on the things like that where there's issues, we might need to figure out how to have a working group around it, or something for us to really understand those issues. So we'll definitely note that and appreciate you letting us know those issues. And as we move forward, anything else like that, please just shout it on out, and we will note it in our notes that we need to have more detailed conversation about what some of this stuff may look like, both with local, state, contractual issues, et cetera. That's all part of this type of process.
Yes, ma'am, I will. And as far as Councilman Cooper goes, I'd be more than happy to meet with you anytime, sir, to talk about some stuff.
You, Mr. George.
Perfect. Okay.
Ganesha, I don't know how to raise my hand.
Okay, no problem. Shout it on out.
Sorry. I just wanted to chime in a little bit. I was on the subcommittee for this, and I think I'm probably the one who raised the issue about including people who have a felony already. I understand and 100% agree with what Sarah Adams Cornell mentioned. We all have very busy schedules, but we're all very committed to making sure that this work moves forward. And it can be very frustrating to feel like we're just spinning our wheels for no reason, just to have something knocked down at the end. But at the same time, I've also been on that receiving end where it can't be so broad that, you know, none of us are going to agree to things that we don't actually have full all the details on, or at least we shouldn't. And so I think you made the recommendation already that, and I just want to make sure that this is the recommendation that you made. I think it would make a lot more sense if we did have another subcommittee meeting, now that we have the general idea of what we would like to see incorporated in this, for us to actually look at and visit with others that are in the trenches and say, what does in application, what does this look like? What's being impacted, and what are legal considerations, so that our time is being utilized effectively and not completely disregarded. So I'd be more than happy to be a part of that conversation. And anybody who was not in that subcommittee who has past experience or strong opinion or consideration for this, I'd want to make sure that that invitation is extended to those who have that perspective and that the eye for those details. If they were not part of the subcommittee, I'd really like for them to be a part of the more detailed part of it.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that, Gloria. So that was the original intent of the subcommittees, was so that we could get into these smaller groups and kind of work through the nitty gritty. And then we wanted to make sure that we were taking the whole task force as best we could along that pathway, so that we wouldn't have the subcommittees, you know, come to some final recommendations and they miss kind of the making of the sausage. So what we're going to take out of this meeting is back to Ray, that you know, kind of getting into what are the issues that we can encounter both with state law, local law, and contractual, and figure out how to start dealing with that in the subcommittee, because that's exactly where we need to kind of work those things out. So I appreciate that. And the subcommittees, while they are, you know, people have been coming on a regular basis, they remain open for any member from the task force to come and have these further conversations. So thank you for that, Gloria.
Ganesha, Jessica Drake has her hand up.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes, Jessica.
So I just wanted to help the group so that we know where we're at, because we're sharing screen with you, showing you the Accountability Subcommittee's recommendation. As Ganesha mentioned, I've tracked everything that has been stated by every member so far on a separate document that we'll be using to build through this process. If you're new to consensus modeling and what we're doing here, sometimes it can be a little confusing because you're not sure if you're missing your moment to speak or if this is final. But as we've said in the idea that these are themes, and back to what Ganesha just said, what I'm tracking here will be able to broaden what you see in front of you, to build it out, to get it deeper, to get it more refined. This is our journey towards refining to a moment later where we'll all say, yes, we agree, or no, we don't. Or we'll 21CP will offer up those recommendations. But so just continuing to give your feedback. Debate is fine, but feedback is as important as anything. We can deal with the debate later in subcommittee or as we process this. So thank you so much for sharing. I just wanted to let you know what I've heard. I've heard about the correction and fixing the language to make more clarity around home ownership or business ownership. I've heard from the group about the interest in having returning citizens as part of the board, but a discussion and the debate about what level of felony that might involve, if any. We've also heard the suggestion of a nonpartisan lawyer who can help guide in a non-biased way. Craig also suggested a city attorney's presence. We heard from the FOP that the whole scope of authority of the board and the scope is a big issue, and that's something to consider as a major issue into this larger subcategory. So I just wanted to revisit that for the group so they knew where we'd come along in the dialogue.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Jessica. Oh, go ahead. Is there something else? I was going to go to the next slide.
Well, yes, I did see Councilwoman Nikki Nice had her hand up, but it disappeared. So I don't know if she's still wanting to speak or not.
I can. Thank you so much. And to Ms. Torres's point, I know one of the things that we had spoken about in our subcommittee meeting was having the representation of someone to speak to the information we needed as far as the number of cases that have been in front of the board, the specifics of timing and what they were able to get, what they weren't able to get, and also having someone from our municipal counselor's office on the call as well to speak to some of those things that they foresee as us having to grieve with the arbitration, going through the process through our council, or how would it be directed through our city manager's office. So I know those were a couple of other caveats to some of the things we wanted to explore in the conversation as well. So I just wanted to make mention of that, but thank you.
Thank you for that, Councilwoman. And two things, what I'll say to that is one, Jessica, if you could just note, and maybe Craig or Kenny can put us in contact with the attorney, and maybe they can come to the next subcommittee meeting. And then number two, I reached out to the CAB today and said that, you know, just based on the last task force meeting, some of the things they were saying, it might be good to have a listening session with them. What I'm going to do, if they agree to that, is probably maybe just open that listening session up to members of the task force, so that some of those questions that you just asked, how many cases, you know, that sort of thing can be answered. Okay, perfect. Okay, so then will you go to the next slide, please, Brian? All right, so the next one is the Accountability Subcommittee focused on increasing clarity for complaint procedures and expanding access. I think Dr. Thomason, this is what you were speaking to. Public education on the complaint process, including social media, website, and in-person engagement. Create easy mechanisms to submit anonymous complaints. Remove signature and affirmation requirements, and consider the role of CAB in investigating complaints. Any questions or thoughts on this particular slide? MT, are you seeing any hands?
I'm not seeing any hands at this point.
Okay.
Valerie Thompson just raised her hand.
Just to clarify, is this the current definition of what the CAB is doing, or is this what we're proposing?
This is what I believe people are proposing to improve it, so that they need to do public education on the process. They need to better put it out there on social media and the website. And I know that these things right here, I think are what some community members consider barriers, that you can't submit it anonymously. You have to have a signature and affirmation at this point. And so that they want those things removed as barriers.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Anybody else?
James Cooper has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. So again, working on the subcommittee, I think that the like the first one especially, I think is just going to be monumentally important because so many people right now don't even know the Citizens Review Board exists. And I think that education effort to better let our residents know that it does. And I know that might sound frustrating to some people who are like, well, I've done work with this group. I might even work with this group. But I will just remind everybody that in our K through 12 system here, we just don't teach city government. It just doesn't happen. And by extension, that means the various departments. And so it really is incumbent upon us as council, city manager's office, the different departments to be that education. And I think that that's going to be really, really pivotal across all communities that we have that there, particularly as it relates to the items you see there with the complaint process. And I even mentioned too, in the subcommittee, not just for complaints, but when an officer is performing at a standard that a resident's like, yeah, that's great. And that too should be part of the conversation, because we do know that positive reinforcement, it works. Like, it works way better than the negative. And that's not, and hear me when I say this, that's not to say we do not need to hear those complaints. We do, we must. I just think that also having that sort of instance where a resident can also commend someone for their service. You know, someone who comes from a customer service background is really, really rare that at Blockbuster or wherever that we would ever hear the positive thing. It was so rare that when I did get a letter like that, I still have it. And that's from 21 years ago. So I think that's part of it. But I think this public education component is just critical to making sure that this works. So thank you.
Brian would like to speak.
I'll be very brief. I just wanted to follow up on Dr. Thompson's question. So both the public education, the reanalysis of how the complaint process is working, all of that, it certainly wouldn't make any sense to do a public education campaign until we knew what it really was going to look like. And I think there certainly is some room for upgrades. This is also not just the CAB. This is actually the complaint process for the city, how it gets routed through the department, who at the department, whether it's internal affairs or at supervisory level, how that's managed. And we, 21CP, will certainly have some more thoughts on all of those processes. So the CAB piece of this really is just whether the CAB has a role in investigating complaints, which, as we've heard, is a potentially complicated topic. But the way I would look at this is we go through the analysis, we make the recommendations, we figure out what this is actually going to look like, implement it, and then do the public education. If there is some public education to be done in the meantime, that's great, but I would save the campaign until it gets re-envisioned.
Thank you for that, Brian. Oh, go ahead.
Yes, Janine Bella.
Thanks. I'm a tad hesitant to comment. It's my first meeting, so forgive me. But one of the things I wanted to mention is I understand the reason for anonymous complaints, but in my experience of working in HR and being the one to investigate those, you can really go down a lot of rabbit holes and spend a lot of time and energy and then end up kind of with your hands like this because you don't know who to follow up with, or you don't know kind of what direction to head. So I think if there is an anonymous complaint format, there has to be a lot of detail behind it or gather information so you're not spinning your wheels on the back end. And then you really end up more frustrated, and then a complaint kind of lodged out there that you can't go dig into because you don't have enough information. Just my 2 cents on that.
Absolutely. That's more than 2 cents. And we appreciate you speaking up on that. That is certainly an issue that we have seen and when we address this issue. So Brian, I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but that is something that I think we have to take into consideration.
Yes, thank you. And I'm sorry I keep bouncing around on the slides. I've got an Apple mouse, and if I touch it, things freak out. So I'm trying not to touch it. So on that particular point on the anonymous complaints, currently anonymous complaints are accepted. However, in order to do so, you have to call, you have to get the PDF form, click anonymous or check anonymous complaints, and then how do you submit that in a way that's anonymous? You either have to drop it off or you have to mail it. What we're really, I think the idea here is creating a web form that gathers as much relevant information as possible, but is truly anonymous and is easy to do. Many people prefer paper, but that does require mailing it in or going to a police department. So we just want to make sure that all reasonable roads are available to accommodate that. But currently they do accept anonymous complaints.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Any other questions?
At this point, Ganesha, I have no hands raised.
Perfect. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, the next slide, we're talking about use of force here. The first is shortened waiting period for interviewing officers after a officer-involved shooting. The next one is prohibit officers from viewing video evidence before giving a statement in critical events. The next one, revise use of force policy to include levels of reporting and review. And last one is further develop the force review board. This slide contains a lot of terms of industry, if you will. So please, please, please feel free to ask questions. These are terms that it took me 5 or 6 years being involved in policing to know and understand. So if you all need us to explain any of this, please do not hesitate to ask. Or if you have any comments about it, please let us know what you're thinking.
I will say right off the bat, Ganesha, that on the first and second items, those are items that would require negotiating with the FOP.
Perfect. Okay, and because they are in the contract already addressed?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. Any other hands or questions, comments, thoughts?
Brian? Were you raising your hand, Brian?
Yes, I just thought I would see if I could flesh out some of this. It might answer some people's questions. So currently there is when there's an officer involved shooting or critical event, there is a 48-hour, I believe, waiting period before the interview can happen. The thought would be to shorten that waiting period, even insofar as interviewing the officer at the by end of shift, if feasible. Currently, the practice is for reviewing video before giving a statement. Officers are called in and they are permitted to view their video right prior to giving a statement, but they do not receive it in advance. The thought from this was, you prohibit them from viewing the video. They give a perceptual statement of what they perceived, and then you can do follow-up questions using the video evidence to tease out any potential inconsistency. One thing that would be critical if this went down this road, and when I saw this as a possible recommendation or theme, is there's no officer on the planet that perceives things the same way as a video looks. So the policy or whatever was built in here would have to have some accommodation for the fact that there are going to be discrepancies in every single statement, and have some ability to accommodate that. The next one, when we're talking about use of force policy to include levels of reporting and review, what we're really talking about is breaking it. I mean, typically this is done in like levels 1, level 2, level 3, where level 1 is very low level use of force, level 3 is a high level. And what you try to do is give your resources, you properly allocate it to the investigation of the severity of the incident. And this allows you to not over-investigate low-level uses of force and make sure you have very high level of scrutiny for high levels of force. And as far as the Force Review Board, currently there is a review process by command staff, and they bring in people to support that review. I think the thought here is to formalize that and make it clear, again, in conjunction with the levels of reporting and review, which cases you're going to review formally and at what level. So that's just some of the thinking around this.
James Cooper has his hand raised.
Just clarification, and maybe it's Brian or maybe it's someone with law enforcement. Someone help me understand where the development for just that first item, like why we have the current policy that we do. Is that a standard nationwide and or globally? And what would be the implications for doing it this way is my first question. And my second one, I'm from some philosophy podcasts I've been listening to lately, and then just conversations around this topic generally. On the second item, I mean, I don't know, memory, I hate to say this because it's kind of, it's unsettling to say, but memory is maybe not as, it's not as coherent as we might, as human beings, like to believe that it is. So it's just something I would really want to, I know that sounds like, well, wait, but I perceive and I know. I'm just saying that is a way more complicated conversation than we might be comfortable with. So just something I was curious about. But that first question, if you could help clarify to me what that means and why, please. Thank you.
And Councilman, you're asking if someone can explain why there's a 48-hour waiting period right now?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so someone can explain to me why there is the period that there is right now, and why we thought it would make sense to bring that shortened, and then why, what are we, and then on the second item there, why was it, sorry, my cat thinks she's got some stuff to say too. Why do we think that, I'm just curious, like, how did we get to this place with each of these two items, I guess is my question.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Is there anybody on the call that knows the history of how we got these two provisions, maybe how they were negotiated, or any historical context anybody can provide?
So Ganesha, just a clarifying question. Someone else may have comment on this, but so Councilman, are you asking more about why those are on there as issues, or how we are in the position with our current policy?
Both, City Manager Freeman, both.
Okay.
So I think I can, well.
Mark Nelson has his hand raised.
Good afternoon, and I apologize for the lack of a camera, technical difficulties, but I'm going to give you a basic answer, Councilman, and not so much about how it got negotiated, as much as the science behind it. And it's generally accepted that at least a sleep cycle after a critical incident like that, the officer will recall things more accurately than if you interview them without a sleep cycle. There's plenty of literature, and I'd be glad to try to gather some up to actually get it to you, and you can do with it what you will, that explain it and describe it. And I'm not offering that there aren't opposite schools of thought on it, but that is the general basic reasoning behind the 48 hours. And 48 versus 72 versus 96. I mean, it's not like 48 is the magic number. That's what we had decided on here years and years ago, prior to body cameras even.
Joshua Higginbotham has his hand up.
So if it is based on science, then are police generally in favor of the same 48 hours being given to a suspect involved in an officer involved shooting. That is, if it's about memory, right? And the nature of like the way that this sort of situation affects people and their minds and stuff. Is that something that would be better in practice, like across the board? That is for like people who've been arrested or whatnot. Should we wait for a full sleep cycle? I mean, then I'm saying that that's a question to anybody. Like, I'm really wondering, like, if that is the reasoning behind it, would that be a better policy generally?
Dexter Nelson has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer an explanation to Josh. I worked homicide for 7 years for Oklahoma City, and the reasoning behind that particular question was because you knew where the police officer was, you knew their accountability, so you knew they weren't going to disappear. That's why the police officer was afforded that time period and not the citizen. You don't know the accountability of the citizen if you want to give them that 48 hours. And to comment on the 48 hours, FOP would probably have to back me up on this, but I know that has come down from a federal standpoint as well. And homicide, we used to interview officers right after the shooting happened, but that was the officer's choice. And it has since morphed into, yeah, we're not going to do it for the 48-hour period to let the officer have that sleep cycle situation and to give them the time to collect themselves. And also just real quick commenting on the viewing of the video. I believe it's current practice now for Oklahoma City officers to have the ability to view their body cam videos before making the report. So because the camera is going to capture things that the officer doesn't even capture himself with his own perception. So allowing them to view that camera just kind of helps them collect their thoughts to know what they did. I've worked shootings where officers couldn't even tell me how many rounds they fired. They didn't even think they hit the suspect. So the brain is going to do several different things in the course of a critical incident where you may or may not remember certain things. Your senses are going to react differently. You might hear something, I might see something. I've worked shootings where, officer smelled an orange. He had no idea why he smelled an orange in a domestic shooting, only to find out during the course of the investigation that the wife was cutting up an orange when the husband was beating her and the officer arrived and shot him. It's weird things like that happen in the brain. That's another reason why you want the officer to review the video before they make the report. So.
I have no more hands raised at this point.
Perfect. Okay. Then we'll go to the next slide, please. Okay.
Hey,
Garland.
Can you see me?
We should just automatically look at you every time before we move to another subject. Go ahead, Garland. I'm sorry. We didn't see you.
I mean, when we start talking about basic science, I will remember more right now than I will a day from now, 2 or 3 days from now. If I have an opportunity to review a video prior to making my report, I will end up making my report cater toward what I'm seeing and observing and the position of what I'm taking. So some of this, I mean, what you call it, is just basic common sense to a civilian, whereas all of us can justify and rationalize our position once we take one. So when I look at that, and I noticed across the country how an incident happened today, right now, at 2:45 in the night and less than in the morning, we have a statement from the police department. They've showed transparency. They've showed openness. They provided a statement. I think whatever policy we have in place at the present time definitely needs to be tweaked. And I think that allowing them to observe that video prior to making a report is not a good deal for the citizens and even for themselves. So the openness, what they call it, transparency, truth, and accountability is everything. So prohibiting the officer from viewing it, I agree with that. Shortening the period, I agree with that. And most common citizens will agree with those particulars. So Whatever's in place, we understand that has to go before the FOP and the bargaining unit and the membership as far as the vote is concerned. We understand all that. That's the purpose of why we are here, is to put things in place, to address concerns, and to make things better for the officers, for the community, and for general human public in general. That's what we're here for. I just had to make that comment.
Thank you for that. And I will tell you, I went through this process, you know, in my police department. And this is generally a place for very robust conversation. So we will definitely continue to have this conversation as we move forward, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next. Okay, perfect. So this slide, this has been talked about quite a bit, these issues in the working group. We're going to bring some of these issues before you for us to have a conversation. So the first one is increase total CIT officers. Train all, I don't know if train all dispatch proficient officers. So Brian, I'll let you explain that a little bit more after I read through all of the slide. Second one, crisis intervention committee to guide guide policy training response. Next, as OKC potentially invest in a new records management system, a requirement should be that it connects to dispatch and allows for coordination to respond to mental health issues. And lastly, explore the current availability of enhanced 911 services so that community members can input information about their households directly into the system. Do we have anybody who wants to speak further into this or that has any questions, comments, or concerns? And Brian, if you'll just explain, I think I know what you mean by the first bullet, but if you'll just explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so yes, it's definitely my shorthand here. So there was a lot of discussion about increasing the total number of crisis trained officers and that would be valuable. Then there was another conversation about some officers just aren't suited to be crisis response officers. That's really not their primary skill set. The retort to that was, well, then they probably shouldn't be working in the police department. But as we navigated these debates about, who do you train, there was a sort of a distinction between who do you train and then who do you prioritize for dispatch. And in most departments, and I think this is true in OKC, they certain specifically trained officers, whether it's in hostage negotiation, whether they're a rifle officer, a taser officer, or whether they are crisis trained, dispatch can see that. They can see the skill set and they can cross dispatch to make sure those officers arrive. So the thought was train everyone to be CIT certified in the department. Don't let anyone off the hook because they don't want to or they don't value it. Train everyone so that they have the skill set, but then find those that are particularly proficient at it, see them as a resource and dispatch them. And this is in addition to like a designated crisis intervention team itself that may or may not be available. This is just on regular patrol. Just as long as I'm talking, the crisis intervention committee, the thought behind this is that it is a group, multidisciplinary group of service providers in Oklahoma City, perhaps with some academics, perhaps with, backed by city resources, to come together and perhaps on a quarterly basis to think through policy, to identify new resources, to look at training, to debrief critical events to see if there is room for improvement. So what that really allows is direct guidance from the mental health committee on how to best resolve those situations. There certainly was an issue raised in the de-escalation subcommittee as to whether this is actually a city entity or whether this is outside of the city somehow, but does provide that guidance, and that's certainly available for further discussion. The records management system piece really is about this and the enhanced 911. The next two are two sides of the same coin. which is how do you get information to officers or whatever first responder you're sending about the specific person or location they're going to in a coherent way. And one option allows officers to put information in about a particular person. If they're encountering Brian a lot, you know, Brian has his particular triggers. He has a mental health provider perhaps that could be contacted, a family member. There's a lot of information that if you had about Brian, you could interact, you could go towards the best outcomes. We see this frequently where there's a so-called frequent flyer that officers interact with repeatedly, but then he encounters officers in a different district that don't know his MO and they react poorly and it leads to tragic outcomes. This just gives as much information that the department has on the person. The flip side of this is enhanced 911. If I have an autistic child or someone with special needs or whatever is going on in my household, if I want to put that information saying, if you come to my house and you encounter Brian, here is what you should do. It just provides more information ahead of time to drive towards better outcomes. Thank you.
Ganesha, Grace Franklin has her hand up.
I just wanted to touch on the CIT officers from the policing group, which is the smaller group that we've gotten a lot of information about CIT officers. And I think one of the things that some people want is for all officers to be CIT trained on the same level. And like Brian was discussing, that has been a very robust conversation because CIT training, I think for all officers is mandatory. It should be, and they should have a certain level. But there has to be specialized officers that get, in layman's terms, like a master's course or a PhD or a higher advanced level of CIT training. And those officers should be voluntary based on other police departments where this works. And that cannot be to all officers, because another thing that happens is they get additional pay, which they should. This is an advanced training that you have. It's specialized, and it's for officers who really want to do that advanced training, because those officers go out on specialized calls. But I think we really need to look at it in terms of what we are looking for the police department to assist in when we talk about mental health alternatives. So yes, all of them need CIT training, but when we talk about specialized training, I think that is more so geared towards people who volunteer, who want it, who have a passion for it, just like officers who work with youth or work with differently abled people. You have to have a passion for that. And you need to have a passion for mental health and helping people with that, which means you go the extra step and you get the incentive pay. But that level of training for every officer, I don't think is the most efficient way for us to do it. That's just one of the opinions from the policing group. Just getting y'all know.
And that's actually a best practice as well. What Grace just spoke into. Any other questions on this or thoughts on this particular slide? If not, we're going to transition to, we had a couple of more slides, but I definitely want to leave enough time for Brian to review an early recommendation on transparency that we want to put before you. And we want to have enough time for you to have questions about it. So anything else on that last slide? Okay.
No hands up, Ganesha.
Okay, perfect. All right, Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you for the transparency recommendation presentation.
Stalling here just for a second while I figure out how to make this screen share work. Should be it. Okay, does that show up on everyone's screen right now?
Yes, just a partial, but we can see it on the screen.
Okay. Okay. So what I'm putting up is a memo that we sent to the city, I guess 2 days ago, that is talking about an issue that had, it was really, if you drew a Venn diagram around our community engagement, what we heard from the oversight committee, what we heard from the working group, what we heard from this task force, especially in reviewing some of the prior issues that were discussed even before we got involved, talking to members of the community, just across the board, one of the big issues was transparency. And I think this is going to surface in a lot of other areas as we continue this work. But it became very clear that there was a overwhelming interest in putting some parameters around quickly releasing video evidence or possibly even objective evidence in critical events as quickly as possible to the public. And we wrote this memo that really goes into some of the pros and cons on this concept, but some of the best practices that we have seen in other jurisdictions that have really worked has really been around 4 critical areas, which is that when there's a moment of calm, when you're not in the middle of a crisis, and you can bring these ideas forward and think them through. Department is very well served by having a policy that sets out what the specific timing of the release of information will be, regardless of whether the objective evidence is favorable or disfavorable to the department or the city. In other words, a commitment as to when they think they can put it out. That way the community knows, the department and the city have made a commitment to it, and hopefully there are fewer times that they have to deviate from for some extraordinary circumstance, that this really is just coming out. And that does not mean that the objective evidence is not redacted in some way to protect the officer, to protect the subject, you don't always need the more shocking parts of the video. You can stop it right beforehand, but just to give whatever is important to understanding what that event really is. Second issue that often comes up is that the department needs and the city, if the city is going to issue statements, but clear parameters for any statements to ensure that the statements are factual and do not prejudge the incident. And that's a controversial issue because sometimes, if this is a so-called, good or justified shooting, community will react very strongly if a chief or member of government comes out and says, this looks fine to me. At the same time, the community can call for prejudgment the other way. This is clearly outrageous. Terminate the officer right now. We want criminal charges today. And there's got to be a balance between those two tensions so that the processes that are put in place to investigate and come up with more information are allowed to play out without prejudgment. But that's why providing objective evidence out publicly can be very, very valuable to bring the public along with the investigation as possible. Number 3, and this is a very sensitive issue, is a prohibition on releasing the criminal background of the subject, except as necessary to understand the incident. And what usually comes up is, if the subject was a felon in possession of a firearm, and that is the basis for the initial arrest or contact, the fact that they were a felon is relevant. What they were a felon for is not. And unless the officers knew it and acted because of that. So it's a little bit of a critical or nuanced analysis there. But generally, a smear campaign somehow trying to undermine the credibility of the subject or simply saying they're a criminal, they had it coming, those sorts of things need to be excised from any comment or press release about the event. And then the last is a commitment to regularly update the public on the developments in the investigation. Everyone wants to wait for that final conclusion and you don't want to prejudge incidents, but that doesn't mean, again, if you have objective information that is discovered that changes the understanding or is is useful for the public perspective, that you release what you can as soon as you can. And that avoids the problem of, well, we all just have to wait for the investigation and no one hears anything for a year or so. So unlike the other things that we discussed today, this actually is a recommendation from 21CP to the city. And we did detail in this some of the parameters around, timing on this. California just passed a law that requires release within 45 days of the incident. DC Metro requires 5 days. Colorado is 21 days. And then on the extreme end of it, Seattle Police Department requires release within 72 hours. But we're not prescriptive on this. What the policy says, in our opinion, is what commitment can you make to getting information out quickly? What can you actually do on a regular basis to avoid the problem of not meeting that promised deadline because of some extraordinary circumstance? Understand the extraordinary circumstances, understand the tensions between, if there is that 48 hours before an officer gives a statement, you probably don't want to release the video so that they can review it before they give that statement. On the other hand, where do you draw that line is going to be very, very fact specific. But that is the recommendation we've put out to the city, and I know the city is very interested in hearing what this group thinks about that, and any feedback that this group might have as they consider their response to this recommendation. And Ganesha, I'll turn this back over to you unless you want me to facilitate this part as well. Although I'm obviously perfectly happy to answer any questions or concerns about this.
Yeah, definitely. Are there questions, concerns, thoughts? As Brian mentioned, this was something that we've heard loud and clear when we first started engaging with you all. It's certainly something that I continue to hear in the community, and it's certainly something that is continued to be discussed nationally. So wanted to bring that before you. Dexter?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I agree with all four of those points that you pointed out. They're Public Information Officer 101. But number 3 is one that sometimes is outside of the control of law enforcement. A lot of times the media will gather that information on the subject and release it on their own. So I guess departments have to be mindful of that. And you can't turn down that public request when they ask for information on the person that was involved. But I guess you have to be mindful of the fact why they're asking for it. But we've had that happen several times before when I was the public information officer, where the media would smear the individual themselves by putting out their criminal record when that was never the department's intent.
Thank you for that context. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
Oh, I was just going to say Joshua Higginbotham has his hand up.
So I guess my question, and this is maybe is a little more general concerning public information within the police department. One of the things that I've never quite understood, I guess, is it being a legal principle, the presumption of innocence until a trial. Why is it that people's mugshots are released almost, it seems like, the same night of an event very often? And I don't know, I'm not saying that that is anybody's, I'm not saying that that's the public information officer in a police department, right? But I mean, is there, what sort of guidelines control like how it is you can get a picture and the information of a suspect, right? Because it seems to me, if your picture as someone who's been arrested is out there, and that's the first image people have of you, right? That's going to be very difficult to get a fair trial. So I'm just kind of wondering what governs that, if anybody can tell me.
So Chief, do you know, is it our policy, is that something we release as an open records request, or is it something that we release as a practice? If it's a mug, like a mugshot, like what Josh was describing.
Everything we release follows the Open Records Act. That's available online, Josh, for you to look at. It is state law, and we follow that religiously in everything that we release.
But are we using, like, if someone is accused of a crime and that, you know, a mugshot is provided, is that something that we have released, like what we're talking about with body cam video, that we have released on our own just as a part of putting information out? Or is it something that we provided in response to an open records request?
It could be both. Sometimes you may be required to release that information as far as the open records. Booking photos are an open record, especially once charges have been filed. And so I just have to know the particular circumstance. But again, it's all going to follow the Open Records Act and the laws that go along with that, the rules and procedures with open records. That's what we follow.
Past experience has usually been once the name is released of the involved individual, the media starts data mining that name. And like you said, you can find the booking photo on public record. There are magazines that put out people's public booking photos, and they get that information, they release it. They don't necessarily get it from law enforcement, but they may get it from a different agency. But typically they are getting that information, gleaning it and putting it out before usually the department has a comment on the shooting or on the incident.
I thought I saw another hand.
No other hands raised at this moment.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'll ask this, and then I'll turn it over for any other business. But does this recommendation speak to some of the issues that you guys, you know, have been talking about? Is this, you know, I just want to make sure that before we switch over to anything else, that any thoughts or anything that people have around this, any questions, anything like that. Okay. All right. So I thought this was going to be a robust conversation, so I saved quite a bit of time for it. We can do one of two things. We can give you 15 minutes of your life back, or we can go back to one more slide. Any thoughts one way or the other for that? Councilman Cooper, I think, is your hand up? Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Can we go back to the recommendations? I'm sorry. I'm a very visual person, so I need to, before I sign off on that, I think I need to see those again.
I would say I've already blocked out this time, so I'd like to take advantage of as much as we can do during this time that I've already blocked out for this.
Perfect. Okay.
Greg Freeman. Craig, I noticed you have your hand raised.
I know Councilman Cooper had something, you wanted to look at one of the previous slides, and I was going to come back and talk about Ganesha's question on the transparency and the policy there, the recommendation. So I'm just going to come back and address that. But I'll wait till after Councilman Cooper's finished.
Not this one.
You want to see the 4 points in the letter again?
Please. So on that first one, you in your letter, you had different cities with different times. How would we go about determining our time? Like there was like the 72 hours, the this, the that.
Right, it ranged from 45 days down to 72 hours, depending. Really, the devil's going to be in the details on that. And I think what would best serve the city would be to find the timeline that is both practically, you know, politically and legally navigable for them, such that they are hitting that deadline. The worst thing you can do for legitimacy is to say, we're going to have this out in 24 hours, and then it takes you a week every time to get it out. So whatever that time period is, pick it carefully, make sure you can meet it, and then stick to it so that you have the credibility of, you know, meeting your promises. And that's the recommendation to the city on that. It's not thou shalt do any particular timeline. It's, you know, make your commitment and then stick to it.
Craig, City Manager Freeman, what is that timeline right now? I'm sorry.
So right now, we haven't had a specific policy. We've had a practice, and Chief, you correct me if I get off board anywhere in here. And typically what has happened is that the department would wait until after the district attorney had determined whether or not charges, and I'm speaking specifically to officer involved shootings, whether or not charges would be filed. And once they determined that, then the video would be released. And in most cases, that probably ended up being somewhere around 30 days. But we've had some recently that took longer, both on our investigation as well as taking it to the district attorney. And so all of us, I think, with some of the recent issues that we've had, have recognized that the amount of time that it takes to get through that, even at the 30 days, leaves the public with questions that, regardless of how the video appears or whether it's a shooting that results in charges or not, whatever the situation, that we recognize too that that's a transparency issue. So the practice has been to wait until the district attorney has determined whether or not they would file charges in whatever county that we're in. And the department has been looking at this and trying to adjust that practice, but we agree that a policy that we set forward, I think, helps to establish, one, that accountability for us, as well as the it's a public accountability, but it's our own accountability of something we're going to try to achieve. And so that's why I would like for the police department, and that's really why I'd raised my hand to have this conversation, was I would like the police department to continue looking at it. And I think they've got some concepts. For me, as I look at this, I would say 72 hours is going to be hard for us to achieve consistently with some of the situations I've seen related to specific incidents. But also, if I think of the furthest one out, I think that Brian referenced was like 45 days. That feels too long. So somewhere in there, I think it'd be good for us to find a reasonable time that we could recommend that we believe we can consistently have it out, not just what everyone would like to see, but what we think we could consistently have it out. And then we can have discussions around that. But I think that's really where we come back, is looking at some period. And I don't know, Chief, you can talk about it if you want to, the time periods that you're thinking about. But for me, I was looking at more like a couple of weeks. And as we started having some conversations, it felt like I was confident we could consistently meet that, but it does feel like that's quite a long time that elapses before that's released. And so, Chief, would you just share your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. This is actually something we've been looking at for a long time, and even well prior to this coming to fruition. I never liked the process of waiting until the district attorney ruled, but we were bound by that. And so I started discussions with all of the counties that Oklahoma City incorporates with those particular district attorneys a while back. And they all agreed that, times are changing and that would no longer be an issue, would not affect their cases. And they agreed that we would be doing this. We also work in coordination now on the information we have released. If you've noticed, we've released several incidents recently, much sooner than you would see before. And so that's what we're guiding that by, is we think we can do this, well within a certain time frame, but we want to give ourselves a little bit of cushion there, because what Brian said is very important. We don't want to set a standard that we could ever miss. Our goal would always be, and again, 45 days is way too long, but we're looking at something, much less than that, but that our goal would be, whatever the time frame is that we set, our goal would be to get it out prior to the end of that date, not to sit back and wait. For example, if we chose 14 days, we don't want to just sit back and release it on the 14th day. Our goal would be, as soon as we're done with the interview of the officer, we put our video together and we release it. And that could be, 7 days, it could be 6 days, or anything in there, but that's what we want to look at. But we have to give ourselves that leeway there, because sometimes these investigations can be very complicated. We may have to interview the officer and then go back and look at that against what we know already, what the body camera says and other things, and make sure that the information we're putting out is as accurate as it can be. And if you'll notice too, in the statements that we've released recently, we say that it's still under investigation and it could change, because we know that as investigations move forward, it could end up, something different. So what we're looking at doing right now is taking this information that's in here, and I'm going to work with the FOP and our staff and our investigators, and we're going to come up with a policy that we can put in place that will meet the requirements of this, but allow us to put that information out much quicker. And it doesn't just apply to officer-involved shootings. You know, it could be any other incident that's gaining attention or gaining traction through social media that we want to get out in front of. And so that's what we want to address in the policy or the procedure as well, is that it's not just an officer-involved shooting, but that's what we're looking at. And I've got some ideas of where that time frame would be, and I think we'll be successful in doing that. But I just want to discuss that with the FOP and with staff too, and make sure we're all in line and able to meet those deadlines reasonably.
Thank you both.
Joshua Higginbotham has his hand raised.
Yeah, so one of the questions I had, and I think for Chief Gorley, like this would be, I don't know if there is a distinct policy on this, but working in this, not just with officer involved shootings, but with other cases and some attorneys and their clients, that whenever body worn camera footage is released, it will be for a very specific segment of the body cam. So maybe not from the point at which they're dispatched, but for a specific segment of the video during which, let's say, an incident occurs or something. Is there a standard practice on, like 911 calls are recorded by law, but from the minute that the phone starts, like they answer, right? And it goes the entire length of the call. And I didn't know, is there a standard or practice concerning like the entire length of an incident from like the point at which an officer is dispatched until the end of the incident? Is that what's released, or is something edited down from that? Is there a practice in place?
When we make a public release, we try to limit it to the facts of the incident. And the reason behind that is, you know, the amount of space and things that you can put out there. You're sometimes limited with technology and what you can throw out there. So we want to be able to tell the story. But once we do release that statement, those events that are in there, say we did something to shorten that down and not release every part of the body cam, that is still available and it is an open record. So once we release our statement of the event and of the incident with the factual things behind that, then someone can make an open records request and they can have the entire body cam. I will tell you too that if there is something that's relevant there, we're not going to edit it for fact or anything like that. The only thing that might be shortened down in the body cam would be, you know, things that might be too gruesome, something like that we wouldn't want to put out there. Or there are times where the camera just runs and an officer may be sitting in their car and absolutely nothing's going on. They're in the car by themselves. So things like that, someone could still get that, but we probably wouldn't release that as part of our statement because it wouldn't be relevant to the event.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands. Let me look for Garland. Oh, there's.
I'm here. Yes.
Okay. Were you waving your hand? Okay, I can't even look for you. All right.
72 hours is more than enough. It's amazing how across the country, everybody can do it quicker than that. If you have the information, you know who the officers are, you know where the incident was at, you have the 911 call, ain't nowhere in the world we need to be 2 weeks and a month, 30 days, and I got to wait on the DA, and all of that's called cover up for the general public. We look at that as a cover up versus being transparent, versus being open. And that's the way everybody would look at that. It's 3:20. An incident happened at 3:20. Tomorrow at 3:20. The next day at 3:20. The next day at 3:20. We don't know what's going on. We took the call. We involved in the incident. We got the video. Just trying to make sense. And we understand that it has to go before the FOP. We understand it got to go through the DA. We understand there's a process and a procedure. We saying tweak the procedure, fix the procedure. Everybody else across the country can, so we can. We the Sooners. let's get to be a Sooner moving forward with progress to fix, change, and correct where we at.
Thank you for that, Garland. I'm sure the chief will take it into consideration when they go look at this time frame on this matter. And I think I saw, yeah, Councilman Cooper, your hand was up.
One more, like I said, very visual, so I had to see this again before I could comment. So I appreciate the time. And I think this again might be maybe both for 21 CP and maybe Chief and City Manager Freeman, but I believe this in a recent, when Chief Gorley presented the budget on the 4th, there was conversation about a new social media contract and group working with the police department. And I'm wondering if this is an opportunity to combine this recommendation with that particular social media work, particularly when I'm looking at, well, I mean, really 2 through 4, but 2 and 4 really stand out the most in terms of like creating that language about what is the most appropriate way to speak to, you know, whatever an incident is, and you know, not prejudging and these sorts of things. So I see an opportunity there. And then whatever that timeline is of the release, making sure that in those interim hours that there's like a regular update, even if that regular update is, you know, no news, but keeping the public informed. So I'm just seeing that opportunity for this new social media group. So I'm just curious if you all could comment on that, if I'm far off base or what you got.
I think the main way this is applicable to those areas is number one, those positions, we had to have those in place so that we could put information out in the manner that we're doing it that's consistent with what other agencies are doing around the country. You have to have people that can put these pieces together to, you know, to tell that story and to put that information out. And there's a skill that's involved in that. So that's why that was part of using the grant to hire those positions when we did, you know, since we couldn't get them worked into our budget right now, or at the time, you know, with the budget cuts that were going on due to COVID. So that was part of that. But number two, you know, again, like we've been talking about, we're going to follow open records. We're going to follow the laws and how we release information. And it will be responsive to requests of the media. And that's going to drive a lot of that. And some of those things, you know, when we release those, it may be things that people look at and not like in particular, but it's just like, you know, the responsibility on us to release information that may not look good on us, but it's the facts and it's required by law. It's the same thing on the public side of that. There are things that the media will request and that we're required to release by open records that someone may not like, but again, we're going to follow the law. We're going to do what we need to do in that to make sure that that we're meeting all of those requirements.
So as a follow-up, Chief, I guess more specifically, I mean, and I appreciate that response. I mean, in an instance where, and I've just seen this, not just here, but I've seen it nationally too, where an incident happens and immediately there's a response from someone saying, that person, the officer's innocent, or this person, like that sort of comment. Like, I'm just curious how, if this is a recommendation that's coming, then how can we work with this new social media group to make sure that the language we're using whenever there is an officer involved shooting, that we don't just see a statement immediately from someone in the department who says, oh, this person, this, don't worry about it. The officers totally, they did the right thing, because we have seen that. Like we have seen that here. And that's what I'm wanting to avoid. That's what I think this is wanting to avoid. And so I'm just wondering, is this an opportunity where, how are we going to execute this particular item? Is this where we would be working with our social media person? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
I think, and I'm trying to think of an instance where we've done something like that. I mean, and that's, but again, that goes back to what I said at the start and why you have to have some timeframes there to get the information and get your officers interviewed. And I've said this before many times, when this process starts, when we have a significant incident involving an officer, no matter what it is, I get a phone call. That's the first story I get. By the time I get to the scene, I get a different story. The media is wanting something right then. We have to give them some kind of statement as to what happened. We try to make it clear that this is all preliminary. Here's what we know so far. But then after that officer's interviewed and we release that final statement, you know, prior to the investigation being complete, it could be different again. And that's just part of the process. You know, it's very difficult. You know, I can't imagine ever saying the officers did nothing wrong, but the initial information that we get at the scene could change later on. And we work very hard, you know, to continue to look at instances like that where we have information that later is proven that that wasn't accurate. And we go back and we debrief those incidents and figure out, was there a way we could have articulated that better so that maybe we didn't make it sound so firm in that statement. So that's something we do work very hard on. That's why I have specific public information officers that's all they do. They're not perfect. They're going to make mistakes. We all do. I was a PIO myself. I did on-call PIO many times. And I said things that I thought were fact at the time. We later found out that wasn't accurate, and we always go back and correct that. The media does that too. You see retractions in the newspaper. You see, you know, sometimes reports later where they say that, you know, this information wasn't accurate at first. And so it's a complicated issue. I agree with you. I'd love for it to never happen. We strive very hard not to do that, but I know sometimes we're going to make mistakes in this. That's just the nature of our world, because it takes so much time to get to the facts.
I would just add to that, Councilman, that definitely, you know, I think I'm understanding where you're coming from, that, you know, the idea sometimes you put information out and you look at it from the context of your particular position. And one of the things that I like about this is with this position is it'll be a non-uniform position. So you have someone, they're working in the police department, but they have that civilian perspective that they're looking at that. And the goal will definitely be to try to release information in a way that it's not trying to message in one way or another. It's trying to be factual. And that should be our goal always, whether it's just the terms that we're using or how we're describing it. But like the chief said, determining innocence or guilt, or if it's a justified or unjustified shooting, the going through that and just laying out the facts is the goal of the transparency. The process and time when we do our investigation, when the DA does their work, that determines, you know, at a later time, whether or not there's criminal charges or issues there, and whether there's any discipline that's involved. That's at a later time as that evolves, and really shouldn't be things that we're trying to weigh in on early. Right now, it's just transparency of trying to be as factual as possible and release factual information.
Garland, are you waving your hand?
Hand up, yep.
My first question is, what is the time frame on us being able to release public information? And the reason for the question is because for some reason, open records release, folks are putting in requests and they're not getting them in a timely manner, even at all. So do we have a policy on the release of public records information? What's the time frame?
So I think we've got one of our attorneys on that could answer what we're required to do with open records.
Yes, this is Amanda. The requirement is that we have a reasonable amount of time to respond. So it depends on the type of request, on the information requested, on the potentially responsive documents. Every request is reviewed by legal, and then it is sent out. So it's just a reasonable amount of time.
a reasonable amount of time. So that's unlimited. And the
It's
reason
not
I'm saying,
unlimited. It's not unlimited. That's per state statute. And the state statute requires that we work diligently to get that done. And our office, the legal department, as well as all the departments within the city, work within the limits and their abilities. And so we're usually able to turn them around within about a week. There are some that are larger and have quite a few more documents to review, and they do take longer.
well, I'm basically what we're experiencing is quite more time than a week on most of them. I think with social media in the manner in which it is right now, when we don't respond in a timely manner, it has a tendency to have the general public in a much negative role as far as they're experiencing what's going on, because what happens is, you know how you tell a story and how it end up over here totally different from what happened and how it goes down and everything else. And too often right now is social media actually have videos themselves also, and they are releasing them as quick as they get them. Incident happened today, I got it today, it's out there today. It's all over the world right now. And so that within itself has a negative impact on the police department or the task force, anybody else, by not being transparent, not being open, not being visible sooner than whatever program process that we're doing at the present time. So like I made the comment earlier, 72 hours is too long, but definitely that or less should be our policy moving forward, because these incidents or these situations, if my loved one is shot, killed, or dead, I'm not going to forget this. So the longer you drag it out, the more negative impact it has on the general public, as far as thinking that something is being hidden or covered up or whatever, whether that's the truth or not. The sooner the better. And just like you just got through saying a moment ago, and just like the chief just got through saying ago, we can always update. We can always revise. But transparency off the top from the get when the word say go is needed, necessary, and that's what the public wants to hear. An incident happened. These are some of the circumstances that took place that we can elaborate on or provide you with information. We will give you further update as information is made available. See how simple that is? That's what the public wants to hear. Something versus no comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Garland. And we are at our time for today, and I don't see any other hands. We will continue this process in our next meeting to go over the slides and the themes that we're pulling out. We encourage you to attend the subcommittee meetings to further work out these issues and these things that we've talked about. And as I stated at the top of the hour, any listening sessions that you all want to send to me, definitely please do that. I actually have a listening session starting with somebody who works in the Oklahoma City schools right now. So I will probably pop off if there is any other discussion that starts. But are there any other questions? All right, well, as always, we appreciate the time that you all take out of your schedule to show up and to do this work. Really appreciate you all, and have a wonderful evening.
Ganesha, can you send me the link for the school district listening session?
Oh, it's just me. I'm talking with her to set up something, hopefully. So I shouldn't have said listening session, but
okay,
she and I are going to work through hopefully setting some things up.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Ganesha.
No problem. All right, bye-bye, you guys.
Thanks, Brian. Task force, are there any things that you all want to consider before we dismiss? I really appreciate each and every one of you being with us today. I really appreciate your input on this matter, and encourage you to continue to attend the committee meetings and give us your thoughts. Anybody else before we dismiss? Thank you so much.